Good evening, everyone. And thank you so very much for joining us here tonight. Thank you also for your patience. We encountered a few technical difficulties, but everything seems to be running very smoothly now. I'm so pleased you all could join us here tonight for Waldman's Swimming Aimlessly, One Man's Journey Through Infertility and What We Can All Learn From It. I'd like to thank Tiller Press for publishing the book in the first place, and of course our friends at Simon Schuster Canada for publishing it and helping to pull together this event. We're broadcasting live from Treaty 1 territory tonight, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. I'll just let you know how this evening is going to proceed. At first, you'll be hearing from your host for the evening, who will introduce our very special guest, Jon Waldman, after which they'll have a chat. After the chat, there'll be an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions. So over the course of the evening, as questions occur to you, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box, which you'll find right at the bottom of the screen. Rest assured, you will not interrupt the conversation by writing, and we'll get to your questions when it does become time for the Q&A. Copies of Swimming Aimlessly are available through McNally Robinson Booksellers, either online, in person, or via the phone. I'll pop some links into the chat in just a moment to help you find your way to the book. I'll also point out that if you would like to say hello or offer any comments toward John or the participants in the chat, feel free to do so. I'll be sending the chat to them afterwards, so they'll see everything that you had to say. But without further ado, we'll get this event underway. I'd like to introduce your host for this evening, Lauren McNabb. Radio host and journalist Lauren McNabb is a co-host of the morning show on 680 CJOB Winnipeg. Lauren began her extensive career in journalism in 2000 with Global Winnipeg and was later promoted as Global National's Manitoba correspondent. In 2005, she moved to its Toronto bureau, but was often on the move, covering Canada's role in Afghanistan and the aftermath of several natural disasters. Lauren has reported on location from several international cities and served as Global National's Middle East correspondent. Lauren returned to Manitoba and Global Winnipeg in 2011 as producer and host of the award-winning program Focus Manitoba. And in 2016, Lauren became the co-anchor of Global News at 6. Please join me in virtually welcoming Lauren McNabb.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And if you can't, put something in the chat box, because I'm going to put up my hand and say, I am the one, and I am the reason why we are a little bit behind schedule this evening. I've worked from home now for actually 399 days. Only once have I had audio issues doing the show from home. But for some reason, when it comes to doing these things via the computer, I am just not that savvy. So thank you so much for your patience, and really and truly, thank you for letting me be here tonight. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. John with an H, of course, thank you for that introduction. Somewhere my mom is proud. And of course, John with no H, that's how I'm going to call you guys tonight. It's nice that I can differentiate between the two. And it's great to be here because I think we all know this is a hugely important conversation. I first met Jon Waldman as a reporter for Global TV. This was years ago, and Jon at the time was a huge community advocate for his River Heights neighborhood. You might have seen him on TV, and even long before he was an author, talking about smashed windows, property crime, theft, car thefts. And he wasn't just trying to speak up to raise awareness for his community, but he was doing it to make change. And he worked extensively with police, he and his neighbors, to make a difference in that neighborhood. And so that's how I first knew Jon, as somebody who would speak out when things needed to be said. Years later, he wrote his book, Jets, 100 Things Jets Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. And so again, his passion was loud and clear there. And then years after that, we started speaking to him and interviewing him regularly about infertility, his family's struggle with infertility and the challenges there. And so to me, Jon has always been someone who's been passionate and willing to share so much for so many reasons to the better of all of us. And so in many ways, I later learned something different, but when I first heard, Jon, that you were writing this book, Swimming Aimlessly, I wasn't surprised. It made sense to me that you wanted to help again. The book is thought-provoking. I just finished the last chapter a few days ago, and I even laughed several times throughout it, which I don't know if I expected. And so it was kind of this journey of emotions. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight, and welcome, Jon.
Thank you so much, Lauren. You flatter me. Doing pretty well, as good as anybody can be right now. I'm one of those Gen Xers who are about to get pokes with the vaccine, but I can tell you, you won't see a selfie of me across social media. I've had my fill of those posts. I'm ready to talk about this book, especially during one of the sweet spots times of year during Canadian Infertility Awareness Week.
Yeah, it's good timing for this book. And when I introduced you as I did, and I wanted to give the background of how I knew you, Jon, that was important to me because it was no surprise that you would delve into infertility and that I would learn something in this book. But I didn't expect to learn something on the very first page. And that is the fact that you first spoke about these issues and these challenges to CJOB, which I didn't know, which of course is my station. But what stood out for me is that you had that trepidation and nervousness, and that you actually used a pseudonym in that interview. And so I want to start off by just asking, back then, was that concern about going public just about even saying certain things out loud? Or was it about your family and friends and trying to figure out how to navigate all that? Because I would never have put you down for somebody who would have had that nervousness or trepidation.
You know, a lot of it really was that, I mean, I'd done so many interviews to that point, whether I was talking about the Jets or if I was talking on behalf of one of the organizations or charitable causes that I was representing. But, you know, it was just a completely different topic. It was so personal. It was something that I didn't even expect to be happening, quite honestly. When I was, at the time, I was in the Fertility Matters Canada support group with my wife, Alana, and I was sort of tapped on the shoulder and just asked, because I had started to speak up in our meetings, if I would have a conversation on radio. I figured it was going to be 2 or 3 months down the road, but sure enough, 2 or 3 weeks later, Dahlia Kurtz, now on Sirius XM, had called in and found out that, hey, there's this guy that wants to talk. And I was blown away that it was going to be happening that quickly. So as much out of my own awareness and just wanting to have something of a guard still as I was trying to ease into this newfound role that I was embracing, I just needed to have something a little bit of a barrier. Thankfully, it was radio and not television, so I could play as somebody else, even if I was telling my real story. But it was just one of those things where I needed to get my emotions under control. It wasn't long before that I'd really started to even speak within my household, within my family, about what we were going through and what I was going through individually before the opportunity came up. And I just felt like I needed to take a little breath, take things easy for a minute before I was jumping in with both feet to really start talking about this large.
Yeah, like as I said, you know, and I actually Googled you today just to make sure. I was like, this is the same Jon Waldman from like 15 years ago when I first met me. I don't have that wrong, right? Because you've covered so many things, and advocate's really the word I think of when I think of you, whether it's for something amazing like the Jets or something that's challenging like what you and your family went through. And you talk about some of the incredible loss that you experienced, that both you and your wife experiences. And of course, there's the miscarriages, there's the months and years wanting to have that child, and maybe even just feeling lost. And one of the chapters, and I'm going to talk about some of the moments where we laughed, and I laughed reading your stuff, because there's the highs too, and there's those things that we have to laugh about, but there's those lows. And the chapter about Father's Day, I have to say, it brought me to tears, because I think if you want to be a parent, you relate to the idea of wanting that moment and wanting that experience. But you have that line where you wrote, I really felt like I was a dad without a kid. And so life was full, but empty. And then, you know, you talked about that, how that led to struggles with depression beyond your wife, who was living obviously with you in that moment, in that time. Were people aware of how deep that got, and how, where that depth of sorrow, how it lived with you at the time?
I don't think people did. And that's partly by my own hand. As I talk about a lot in the book, is that men have trouble talking about infertility at several junctures in their lives. I wasn't really feeling like I could talk about it with friends, with family. And it was more something that I just pulled into myself. I didn't feel like it was a conversation that I was ready to have. I didn't feel like it was a conversation that, in all due respect, I didn't feel like it was something that I felt was important enough in a way to talk about. And I think that's that if you ask many guys, independent of those who you see talking in support groups designed for men now, they'll say that, that Father's Day isn't as important as Mother's Day in the first place, but that they try to detach themselves from the emotional side as much as possible, becoming robotic, becoming very focused on the task at hand and being problem solvers as men tend to do. So for me, a lot of it was, just get through this day. The next day will come. Father's Day will soon be forgotten, and just move forward as we can with our planning.
And as you're talking right now, I almost said something flip like, oh, well, Father's Day and Mother's Day, they're nonsense holidays anyway. And I want to admit to thinking that because it reminds me, just as I was thinking of the off the cuff remarks that get made in so many ways in life, where you say something and when you don't hear it from the other side, you don't realize how hurtful or impactful that can be. You think it's kind of this funny statement, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about Father's Day. And that's such a nonsense, hurtful thing to say. And it reminds me of that part in your book where you talk about the friend that you ran into. And at the time you were working to become a dad and hoping to have those moments with your child, and they off the cuff, probably thinking nothing of it, said to you, do you have any kids? And you said no. And they said, well, you better get on it. And that still stuck with you. And so you wrote in the book how long that lingered with you. Are there words like that and statements like that still stick with you now?
Absolutely. That particular moment of hearing you better catch up when there's no actual way possible, unless you're adopting a 5-year-old, to actually get caught up. These are moments in time that you can't put in a bottle and save and then uncork it at a later date. It's not like you're, even in the case of if you have a kid, 5 years down the line, that kid is still 5 years behind where your friends' kids are. So you're not able to ever truly catch up. You're still in a situation where you are looking at your life forever being altered. And it's something that I've talked about in a couple of circles, that that your life does change forever. There's no way to reclaim what you are. I mean, parenthood changes you, as everybody who is a parent knows, but everything is just flipped on its ear. And it affects in so many ways. And it's not just in those incidental moments. Sometimes they're the more present moments, such as being invited to a first birthday party, being invited to, in the Jewish community, a bris milah, or being invited to a christening or to a baby shower, any number of those things. And they're the things that you want to be able to do yourself so greatly that you can't. And in a way, though, what I found was that those moments of accidental or the sort of casual thoughts, comments, are the ones that hurt more than the ones that you are so used to anticipating and dreading and trying to find every way out of, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, she was for all intents and purposes, she's a stranger, really, because you hadn't spoken to her in years, and then that really stuck with you. And you've helped connect us at CJOB with a couple people who are going through COVID treatments in the last year. Sorry, fertility treatments in a COVID year, apologies. And that even, some of those off the cuff things like, oh, there's going to be a lot of COVID babies this year, making the assumption that it's just that easy to like snap your fingers and have a lonely night at home. And next thing you know, you're pregnant. And so I think it's like one of those constant learning processes. And I wondered are there things now, even now that you have your daughter and you've kind of moved to this other side of being a father and having your family, are there things that can still get said that would act as triggers even for parents who have gone through it and come out the other side sunnier and happier in theory?
Absolutely. There's so little done in general in the aftercare realm where you are trying to process that, yes, you have a son or a daughter, or you have twins or what have you. But you're still feeling different. You're still feeling like the mission has been in some ways resolved, but not fully. Whether you're pursuing more children afterward, whether you are just innocently, you're playing with your daughter or whatever, and there's little triggers that will still pop up. I liken it to having PTSD in some ways, because there was an article in the New York Times in 2019 where it described infertility as a true trauma experience. So as you go through that, you're going to get those triggers no matter what. The same way that if there was some sort of other trauma that you experienced, say for someone that was in war or something like that. And it can be just the simplest thing, but it is something that stays with you. And I think that there isn't enough done in general for patients to really know what it is that they need to do, or guidelines and guides that can help you as you progress to that next stage. Thankfully, there are more resources now. If you look online, for example, there are some podcasts, for example, that have groups for both parents and patients. And often you'll be in both of those groups at the same time, because you're potentially looking still to have another child, or you have been through you have your children, but you're still feeling those little after effects. And there are communities that thankfully are there to help you.
I think that's great too, because I have a family member and best friend who's been through fertility challenges, 5 or 6 miscarriages. Imagining what you did through never having a Mother or Father's Day, and then having the highs and the lows. And I've often, every once in a while, little comments will dribble out where I think, I feel I cannot believe what they went through, and I was so not aware of it, right? It's these little trickles of information. And so was there part of this that was therapeutic in any way in getting this all out there, so that people could hear about some of those lows and the highs, so they didn't have to keep retelling things over again? Does that help in the process for you?
It absolutely does. Certainly. And a lot of it comes down to the simplicity that as I was writing the book, and this is, I guess, the silver lining of COVID, was that I got 3 months extra to work on the book. So I was able to, because I was already writing it in episodic format, where I was talking in one chapter about Father's Day, talking in another chapter about mental health, talking another chapter about relationships, that I was able to take clean breaks on it, especially when I was doing the mental health aspect. I found that I needed to stop a couple times, just hard stop, take a breath, slow it down a little bit, and re-engage in a little while. It just felt like I needed to take that time to, because I was revisiting so many of these hard episodes of my life, that I needed to take that time to properly digest what exactly I went through and to write about it in the best way possible. It certainly was relieving to be able to tell the story. And I've always felt, I can't even remember where I saw it. But one of the writers that I worked with at a previous job talked about how one of his bosses said that everybody has a story. And I firmly agree in that. And in my past life as more of a hardcore journalist, and in some of the feature writing that I did in the Free Press, that was what I enjoyed doing, was telling other people's stories. But this was one of those cases where I felt like my story was going to be an important one to tell, because there hadn't been many people that have been talking about it from the male perspective. But what also helped along the way was that there were so many men who were willing to tell their stories to me. Patients like Vince Londini in London, Ontario, who talked about the harrowing experiences that he had and the emotions that he went through after getting his male factor diagnosis. People like Chris Morex, who is in Australia, who talked about his experience of going into online support groups and finding that there was a bit of vitriol coming from female patients towards men, and him needing to find that safe place for him to be as a male talking about it. And then some of the other gentlemen who are talking about running a podcast, hosting a Facebook group. It really brought a community experience to it, and it made up for that community that I didn't have when I was in the deepest parts of infertility as a male and trying to find other guys to talk to about it.
Well, let's talk about that, because I know you have a great circle of family and friends. There are people, in theory, someone say, well, you could have talked to so-and-so, or you could have come to me. And I don't know if people even said that to you after, oh, I wish I had known, right? But what is it about in your opinion, the male dynamic that influences the inability to turn to that other male friend or brother or uncle or whoever it might be in someone's life and say, hey, like, I'm having an issue with my boys, or, like, start it frankly like that? What's going on in your mind that stopped you initially from doing that?
There's two parts to it, and one is a little bit more comedic than the other. In speaking with Karen Jeffries, who, if anybody isn't following her, hilariously infertile on Instagram, we have become good friends through this whole book experience. But she talked to me about how women are much more open than men and are, quite frankly, a lot more explicit in their conversation than men are. Sex in the City is not a portrayal. It's pretty much a real thing, if you want to put it like that. So when you look at there's a certain expectation of how women talk, is that men could potentially be talking the same way, when in reality, guys are wired differently. We don't talk a lot about the feelings that we have. We're wired more to be talking about more basic topics like financials, your family, if you have one, home renovations, that kind of thing. A lot of the locker room talk that is stereotypical about men doesn't exist. In only extreme cases it does, but especially when men are facing a deficiency or feeling like they are inadequate, it's not our nature to open up to really anybody. I mean, it's the stereotype is that guys will not go to a psychologist or won't go to a therapist, and certainly that's true. And it's just something. It goes back to decades upon centuries of roots of just no lack of. No other way to put it. It's a toxic masculinity feeling of rubbing some dirt on it, getting back in the game, and just ignoring everything that you're trying to feel, and instead pushing it away and locking it up in a box somewhere and just getting through things. So when this mentality has been around for ages, and it's thankfully starting to slowly change, but it's still a slow change, and it's not something that's going to change in our lifetime, where guys will be fully open and be able to express themselves the way that women can. It's going to take a long time to do that, and certainly the hope is that those conversations will become easier and better as time goes on. But it takes a lot of effort to get to change what is so much history of how men communicate.
And when I talked about that roller coaster I went on, John, like, the laughs and reading this section, where you had to make your, I think deposit was the word,
Yep.
And there is some laughing moments in there because you can relate to that. I think people, whether it's through pop culture or movies or whatever, or you've been through it potentially, you can see that scene and you can imagine it. And when I say roller coaster, I also had those moments where I was like, okay, well, hang on, women aren't perfect on this, or we're not always talking, or we're not always sharing, or mothers struggle or would-be mothers struggle with those feelings of inadequacy when we can't get pregnant. But then I got to that scene about the first time you had to make your donation. And I thought, okay, well, here it is in a different way. It's sort of like that's all men are expected to do, is to walk into a room. I think you said I have one shot, no pun intended. Like this is my only job.
Yep.
And so does it come down to that in some ways about how we even talk about it? I think the woman carries the child for 9 months. We're connected. Our bodies change. Emotionally, we go through so many things, hormones and all the rest. And we might never be the same after the baby, however it comes out. And so there's so much connection there that it does get boiled down to sometimes that one shot.
Absolutely. And I could use a horrible pun and say that it's a hands-off approach that guys do from there, but really that is the hands-on moment. That is the time where you literally have one thing to do, and it's the one thing that guys tend to be experts at. So when there are failings in one way or another, and sometimes it's something happenstance like what happened to me. Other times it's anxiety, given that there is a nurse waiting on the other side of the door, the other side of the receiver. There's a couple different factors that can come into play, and really the best thing that I ever heard was after my TED talk, a gentleman from Minnesota reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've got an at-home test that I'm trying to promote out." The at-home test, how fantastic an invention is that? That guys don't have to go into
interrupt. It would be because in theory, I know you wrote in the book that you can do it from home, but it's not the recommended practice. They'd rather you do it right there to make sure the sperm is good to go, so to speak.
Exactly.
Right.
If you're doing it to a clinic, you have to do it. It has to be delivered within a half hour. So if you can imagine, trying to drive from Bridgewater out to North Kildonan, that's not leaving you a lot of space, especially if it's dead of winter and there's been a car accident on Kennison or something like that. So you're really playing with time in an incredible way. But there are actual at-home kits that have been developed and it's only been a recent development within the last 5-6 years where samples can be sent off to either there's instant tests that can be done at home, or it can be sent off for examination safely, securely, and temperature controlled, so that nothing happens along the way. Certainly, it makes life a lot easier. But one of the things but ultimately, a lot of guys will still go and do it at the clinic, and there are a lot of aspects within that you're trying to make happen as best as possible. Even as simple as having a little bit of a cough. The sensitivity of sperm can be that if the gentleman is sick, it's going to affect the sperm very easily. If you've had any sort of ejaculation, they say 2 days before you're to abstain. But other factors can come into play, and you really are trying to do everything you can to make sure that one job that you have to do comes out as quickly, as cleanly, and as safely, and as highly productive as possible.
Yeah, I feel like when you hear those things, it's like the more you talk about it, the more someone out there says to themselves, "Oh, aha, why wouldn't we have an at-home test? Or why wouldn't we do this?" The more we express the things that don't make sense to you, the more you might win out of that. And so, when I talk about all the things I learned along the way in reading your book, I was surprised, maybe surprised, not the right word. It was fascinating to me that this was in some ways like so personal and not a memoir, but very much your story. But you wove in all these facts and research and different things that you had read along the way, and blogs and people who had gone through their own experiences. How much work did you put into this in that research component? Because there were terms and medical things going on too that would be helpful for those in the moment. But you want to make sure you're getting that right.
Yeah, it was a lot of research that I had to do. Certainly compared to most of my other books, it was certainly more. Probably on par with what I did for the Winnipeg Jets book, because I did have to pour through so many resources, consider so many different facts and so many different assets to the infertility ratios, to mental health rate statistics, to finding scholarly articles, to finding just researching people to interview for the text. It was a lot to pour through. Certainly, it was aided by having the modern convenience of being able to pour through everything online and being able to connect up online with so many patients and so many researchers. But it certainly was not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. And it's something that I absolutely enjoy. I'm a bit of a history buff in that sense, and it's something that I felt like I needed to tell a full story. That if I'm telling the story of how men struggle with infertility, I couldn't just tell my own story. That because I thankfully did not have a major male factor infertility case. I didn't have to deal with childlessness. We started to go through the adoption process, but we didn't see it to completion. But that's something that you consider also. Even when we were in one of our adoption classes, the remark by one of the session leaders was that it's going to feel different to you walking your daughter or son down the aisle at their wedding because they're not, quote unquote, yours.
That was outrageous, that comment in that book. Yeah. I should have added anger into the range of the emotions that I felt. And then, too, in that research, you're trying to point out to people, because, maybe our only experiences might have been through a movie that we watched or a show, or, the image of, and when you talked about how laying on your back and the woman keeps your legs in the air to make sure the sperm goes in properly. Like, I've seen that scene in the film before, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where we're getting half of these references from sometimes, or that quick rush to the clinic with the Tupperware container of sperm, and you see it, but you don't know what it's like until you're in it, or what it's like to have people say the things like cough syrup, like goji berries. I get that those are healthy, but that cough syrup has been one of those myths around fertility.
It's the most bizarre thing that I'd ever heard. I mean, if all we had to do was have a couple flaming moes, then we would be a lot further along in our existence, right? But honestly, this notion that that everybody has their home remedy for how to get pregnant, and I think the first one that everybody will say is, pretend you're in high school and go borrow your parents' car and go to Lookout Point or whatever, and try that method, or getting drunk, because everybody gets pregnant when they get drunk, right? Because alcohol doesn't suppress hormones; it only encourages it, right? There's just a lot of those myths are just mind blowing, and the fact that you hear about some of these from trained professionals, or you hear about them from people that you'd figure to be more sensitive to a lot of the topics. It's astounding. And honestly, it was one of in a way, it was the most fun part to write about, where we're dispelling some of those myths, because it was like I was finally able to take a giant boulder and just crush those ideas. And if you speak to a lot of infertility patients, and you speak to podcasters who have episodes dedicated to that topic, it's the one that they absolutely love the most, because they can just laugh at it.
But the fascinating part is that somewhere along the way with all of us, no matter what your struggle is, it could be a different health issue. It could be a cancer treatment. It could be trying to get pregnant. It could be, I've even read things about ways to make sure you have a boy if you do it a certain way. And you're like, I don't think there's science there, but okay. But then if you want something so bad, it's also, it can be funny, but it's sad, because people, when you want something, you might try anything.
Yeah, it's true. And there is certainly a little bit of desperation that comes into it. And it's a normal feeling to feel like, I've got to try this. I've got to, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I mean, I'll get on. A lot of people say, I don't mind being having a bunch of needles stuck into me, which is still a concept that I will honestly never be able to understand acupuncture. If it works, great. But that's one of the things that people will always say, is that I will try just about anything. So even when I speak to people like Dr. Liberty Barnes, who I met for the book, and her reflection was that she heard from so many doctors as she was doing her own research, that guys don't want to be examined. They don't want to be poked and prodded down there. So why do we even bother with them? Yet every male that I've spoken to who has male factor infertility says, poke, prod, do whatever you need.
You want to know.
True. Exactly, because you want to know. And that the research is so far behind on male factor infertility compared to female factor infertility is absolutely astounding, because one way or another, male factor is either male factor or mixed factor accounts for 1 in every 2 cases of infertility. So you're looking at this scenario where you have so much of the population dealing with inconclusiveness. So certainly when you're talking about emotions, and when you're talking about how men are trying to deal with their infertility, especially in cases of male factor, there isn't a lot out there. You're going by some of you're almost creating some of the urban legends. You're going by traditional Chinese medicine, which, I mean, for me, I can say that Chinese medicine worked, because goji berries did help the motility in my sperm. It did not, where maca root did not. But I can say that, that there are some that I go into Facebook discussions, and guys are desperate. They want that cure. They want that path. Some men have been directed to take Clomid. Some guys have been told to see urologists, but urologists have not been proven to be forward enough in their education to be able to really examine it properly. So you're looking at guys grasping at straws as much as we can, and you're looking at couples grasping, because, you know, for everything that we've been able to do, and COVID is the perfect example. We're just over a year past when COVID really struck and shut us all down. That we have vaccines that are coming out now, you know, less than 2 years from the discovery of COVID-19. Don't we think that it's time that you start looking at some of these other issues? Infertility could be solved in 2 years' time if you had enough people that were focused on it and directing enough, so that people weren't having to spend tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket to have a kid. And that's what it comes down to, is that if there's enough focus, if there's enough of an examination, and if there's enough of a serious look at male factor infertility and female factor infertility and mixed factor, that a lot of this could be solved so simply if you have the right minds and the right people and the right resources going to it.
Just want to remind anyone tuning in that if you go to the Q&A box, you can enter questions and then John will answer them, because it certainly doesn't need to be me asking the questions all the time. But I do want to follow up on that. And I do have one more if there's time. As I say, I don't want to be talking all the time. Here I am with the questions, John. But it's fascinating to me that you would say that there was you and so many others that you talked to that were desperate for those answers, and yet so reluctant to speak in the first place. It's these really two converging ideas that you could on one hand say, hello, like I want to know, but I'm not going to say anything over here to anyone else. How do you reconcile those two thoughts? Is it because it's in this private moment with your doctor that you can talk, or?
It's hard. And sometimes it's not talking to your doctor. Sometimes it's talking to a third party. For me, I found that having a therapist in the room was a great help. Either individually with me or in couples therapy. I find that sometimes you need somebody that can walk you through your own mind process, and that was something that was very hard for me to do, was to walk through it myself, and that was where a lot of the strife came for me. Was that I just couldn't process everything that was going on. And, you know, and I talk in the book about how men are problem solvers. And let's face it, there's a quotient of us who are very DIY and, you know, we'll find the way to fix a window, fix a door, fix a leak in a faucet or something like that. But there's no way we're going to figure out how to solve infertility on our own, or figure out how to even talk about it. And really, the only thing that I can say is that the most important thing to do is simply to talk, to just let it out, and to do it first with yourself, whether you do it with yourself or with a therapist or with, someone completely different, or just online. There's so much that is rewarding and so much that can come once you start to talk, because from there you start to talk to your spouse, your partner. You start to talk to your family, you start to your friends. If you're like me, you talk on radio. But honestly, just to be able to start having those conversations is the best therapy that you can have, and is the best way to get it out. It is immensely hard. It is draining emotionally in so many ways, and you just feel like you're going to fall over immediately after. And I'm pretty sure I did. But it's something that, and the conversation helps so much. And yeah, and honestly, there's so many people that the sort of edge on being an advocate, or they feel like, can I really make my voice heard? And the perfect example, I might have had a little bit more training coming from a journalism and PR world, but I did my first time as doing anonymously. So for me, if my ultimate message is that if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Well,
it just takes the dedication.
Apologies for interrupting there, John. I talked off the hop about how I really see you as this advocate. And I know one of the things that you've talked often about is, you mentioned it in the book, the fact that there's only so many facilities where you can get this treatment now, particularly here in Manitoba. And so you guys went out west for yours. But you've also talked about costs. And one of our questions comes from our listener right now who says, first of all, she really appreciates your openness and your intelligence, John. I really look forward to reading your book. But can you please speak about the cost of IVF and why you think it is not covered by the government. And yeah, we can talk about mental toll and the physical toll, but there's that financial toll. And
Yeah.
that question is bang on. Let's talk about the cost, because let's face it, not everybody can afford it. And why are we so different than some other provinces, particularly I think Quebec and how they do things?
Well, we're different than Quebec. We're different than Ontario. We're different than BC. And just for people who are wondering, Manitoba has a tax credit available for fertility procedures. However, having said that, medicine isn't covered around it unless your health plan doesn't specifically say that drugs cannot be put toward infertility. We learned that to our advantage, that we were able to write off costs for a number of our medications because it wasn't explicitly said that no, you can't use this for fertility purposes. Other plans do have specifications for what can be used for fertility. But the key with Manitoba is that the tax credit can only be used if you have your procedure done in Manitoba, which is at one clinic, Heartland. For us going to BC, we had to justify why we were going out there. So you're facing a battle. But at the very base, drugs are when you're first doing Clomid or Letrozole or something like that, it's a few $100. When you do something like intrauteral insemination, it's a couple $1,000. When you go to IVF, never minding the drug protocol that you may or may not be paying for, you're looking already above $10,000, sometimes into $1,250 to $15,000. So it is very cost prohibitive. Why it's not covered by provincial? Why it's not covered by federal? It's astounding that this is something that isn't. When you look at things, the way that I can compare it easily is this: for people who say that this is a voluntary thing or that this is an elective procedure. You know what else is an elective procedure? Knee replacement. Because you can walk around with a walker, you can use a cane, you can use a wheelchair if need be. I can be the same way that someone might say, oh, you can just be an uncle, or you can be the family's best friend who takes their kids out. No, it's not the same. If I want to be able to walk, I'm damn sure going to get a knee replacement that's going to be covered by the government. If I want a kid, it should be covered by the government as well. And there's no reason that the federal government has not stepped up and done this. In Quebec, there was such an overwhelming response to their program where there was a round of IVF on the government's bill that they had to stop it because there was so much demand for it. You're still looking at 1 in 6 Canadian couples struggling with infertility, struggling to have a child, which is the most natural thing in the world. And yet we are still facing this issue of not being able to do it as part of our health plan. And everybody talks about the different things that health plans cover and don't cover, that the national healthcare system covers. This is something that is eons behind where it should be. And I was talking with a reporter in the States today, and she's examining why it isn't happening in the States and why only certain states are mandating now and making it available. It's so individualistic and so ridiculous. We shouldn't have to be dependent on taking out giant loans. We shouldn't be dependent on grants from not-for-profits. We shouldn't be dependent on so many things. Our government should be taking care of us the same way that it does in so many other aspects.
You mentioned the different differences between the provinces. Is there a country somewhere that does have a federal program for IVF or any infertility treatment? I think about New Zealand, how forward thinking they are with their bereavement leave for people who have miscarriages or stillbirths. And so, is there actually a country in the world that's done that beyond the piecemeal approach that we see in Canada or the States?
Honestly, not to my knowledge. I haven't delved enough into it. Having said that, though, that every country has different protocols and what they will do and what they won't do. Obviously, similarities in between somewhere, but it's like anything else. There's other countries that have better healthcare systems than we do. There's other countries that have better minimum wage or standards for that everybody gets some sort of payments to get through life. you talk about the New Zealand Bereavement Day. My challenge to anybody from New Zealand is how many people are going to fess up and say, I had a miscarriage. I don't think you're going to get as many responses as the government hopes. It's great that they're doing it, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
But first you have to normalize the conversation. First you have to get people to be able to say that I'm one of those 1 in 4 couples that has had a miscarriage.
You also have to get past and this is to each their own, John, but as someone who's also gone through a miscarriage, you have to get past that idea that you don't talk about being pregnant until you get past this certain window, because then, and I'll put my hand up there, is that having to walk in and say, you don't know this, but I was pregnant. Now I'm not, I'm devastated. Can I please have a few days off, right? Like that whole conversation becomes additionally challenging. So the normalizing, whether it's normalizing that or the cost period, we might argue we have so many long ways to go.
Absolutely, and my heart goes out to you for having gone through that.
And sorry, I just wanted to mention that more. That's it's more about mentioning it because the thought about how we all try to struggle to talk about these things starts with changing the way we're supposed to have talked about them in the first place, right? And that gets back to you, just even what we're supposed to think about men and what your sperm is or isn't supposed to do and what you are not supposed to say is the same thing it is about the conversations around pregnancy. And so I think your book has brought so much awareness to all these things that are circulating in my mind that I hadn't thought of, John. I'm curious with the IVF conversation with government. Let's just focus on Manitoba.
Sure.
Is there any needle to move there? Like as you slowly move the needle on, say, awareness, is there any needle to move on them being open to covering more? Or as far as you know, it is what it is?
It's hard. And we're at such an on-time Manitoba. And for anybody that isn't local, we're dealing with a situation where there are hospital closures, where there are so many cutbacks in our system. I would love to be standing up when the next provincial election comes and say, hey, this is something that if you want to get into the power, if you want to get my vote and the vote of the 1 in 6 Canadian couples in Manitoba who are struggling with infertility, make this a priority. It's so hard to do that right now. Leaving aside how the pandemic has thrown off budgets horribly, that our healthcare system is where it is right now. And it's just getting it normalized and getting us back to where we felt comfortable and confidence in our healthcare system. It takes a little bit of priority, but at the same time, and I don't know. I mean, for all I know, there's somebody on here who's either watching live or is going to be watching on YouTube later. That will stand up and say, hey, this is something that I want to enact. I think absolutely, it's a conversation that needs to be had because we are behind other provinces. We are behind other ideas. And even if it's something where if you want to, not have it as a free for all like Quebec had and learn a lesson from there, and you want to cap it at a certain point, that's understandable. People will get it because of the precedent that has been set before. But then you look at documentaries, like there was one on Netflix about a Las Vegas hospital that was basically providing a lottery system for people to get their fertility treatment covered. You look at foundations, both in Canada and the US, for either by religious sects or just by community that have raised money to help people get through infertility and get through treatments. We shouldn't be dependent on the private sector to fund this. The public sector has to step up. A tax credit isn't enough because people, when you're talking about a bill of $15,000, that's not something that you can amortize. It's not something that you can, in most cases, you can do installment payments on. You have to be able to have that money upfront available right now. And it's something that, I'll say it, that if anybody is considering an election platform, if somebody wants to take it up, message me. I will become an advocate and I will help you put together that platform, regardless of your party, regardless of your affiliation. It's an important conversation and it needs to get started.
John with no H. I'm going to hand it over to John with an H in a couple of minutes. If there are any other questions, we'd love to get them in. I would want to talk about, there are happy moments in your book. Of course, the birth of your daughter, John, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the pooch, because I think a lot of people can relate to, I'm sorry, now I'm forgetting, I'm blanking, Murphy. I wrote it down somewhere.
Mercer.
Darn it. I was like, I think I have it almost right. That, to me, that is, it was so neat to see the addition of Mercer to your family, but also the picture that you paint of him being part of the family, not just this thing that was this replacement animal. So talk to me about the dog first. Let's end this on just a fun note before we ask a question about your daughter as well.
Yeah, for sure. Mercer was no other way to put it. He was essentially a rescue for us. He was a pooch that we found on Kijiji that was in a very bad situation. He was already in, for all we know, his third home, if definitely his second home. But he had gone through a lot of trauma in his own life. The people that had him were trying to breed him with a full-size Dachshund, and it just wasn't happening. And he ended up getting bit on the top of his head, and he was forced to live in a basement and not really see outside much. So in a way, like, we gave him the life that he deserved. And it's so funny, in a way, like, and I talk about in the book that in a way he was like a baby, because he wouldn't run upstairs. He wanted to be carried. He had his accidents all over the place. He needed his feedings. And even now, as he's in his senior years, about to turn 14 and waking us up at 2:30 and 4:30 for feedings, we call him Benjamin Button now for a reason. He was just, in a way, it's not a replacement, but it's a way to feel fulfilled, to feel like you are, it's a holdover to, in a way, to have something that you're taking care of, that depends on you, that needs you the same way that a kid does. I was able to get him to do things like to fetch a ball or fetch a drink for me or anything like that. It would have been fantastic. But as is, it was it allowed us to focus on something other than the issue at hand. It allowed us to put energy into another being, which was absolutely fantastic. And I think for a lot of people, whether they have a little dog like we have, a mini Dachshund, or if they have a full size or what have you, there's so much relief that comes when you can just be out and about with your dog, and it's such a normalized thing, and you can be carrying them around or doing whatever it is with them. It's such a therapeutic thing. And dogs and cats to a lesser extent, have been proven to be so therapeutic as animals to help you through so many different things in your life. But really, he's been fantastic to us. And even now we include him in family portraits whenever we can, just because he is a member of our family. And it's been amazing. I mean, I talk in the book about how we did the Humane Society walk, Pause in Motion, and seeing him do a 5K walk was amazing. You wouldn't expect that from a guy whose legs are maybe a foot tall at most. But it was amazing to see, and to know that I pushed him and he pushed me to keep going. We built a really cool relationship out of it. And it's certainly for anybody who has been thinking about having a dog, if you're going through the same things that my family went through, or other things that in your life, absolutely recommend getting a dog. And for all sakes, get a Dachshund. They're noisy, they can be annoying, but they're done. They can be clowny, but they're absolutely some of the sweetest dogs that you'll ever see.
Well, I know we were going to wrap this up shortly, but we just had a question come in, John, that I think kind of sums up not just the evening well, but your book. The whole goal is to get people talking about this, to raise awareness, to have men start speaking more openly. And this just came in now. The question is, what is your advice to men who are struggling about how to open up the conversations with their friends and families? Where do you start?
It's hard. And honestly, the only thing you can do is really start with yourself. For me, I was doing a little bit of journaling. I was doing a little bit of even just empty email writing, just to myself, and just learning and just finding those spots where I could get my thoughts together. Put a notebook beside your bed. Put have your phone, the notes option on your phone open, and just start scribbling things, and then slowly move forward from there. There's so many groups on Facebook also, and other message boards that you can either do anonymously or as yourself. And they're fully private. No one will see that it's part of your profile. No one will see that you're in this group. Those are safe havens, and you can just go into them. You don't have to talk, but you can just start to see the conversations that other men are having, and they will start to help you feel more comfortable in talking about it and move forward. And really, and I've said it a lot, but it's true. Be prepared to cry. Be prepared to just let all your emotions out. There's nothing wrong with it. Men can cry. Michael Landsberg created it. Sick, not weak. It's actually the truest thing that you could say, that this isn't something that's a deficiency, it's a condition. And it's something that once you know your path, once you know what you're willing to do, once you know what your end goal is and what directions you're willing to take, it's something that can be resolved. And I really do encourage it, because you have to be a participant in it. You can't just be along for the ride. You have to be okay with whatever the decision is made, but you have to be able to vocalize what your opinion is and what your thoughts are, because it's a two-person relationship, or it's you're deciding for yourself whether you want to adopt, etc. But you have to know and be able to say what you want out of it, and if you want to end up ultimately happy.
Is that potentially more freeing, Jon, for both you, but also your relationship? Because I would imagine the tension that exists in the relationship, and whether you want to or not, there's blame that might go back and forth, or the one spouse might feel like they're ones that's always explaining to someone else what's going on. And if you want to be active and use the word, you have to be actively an active participant. I think that would, in theory, hopefully make the whole dynamic stronger.
It absolutely does. When you have proper conversation between the two of you, when there is a live dialogue, your spouse is going to feel like you are an active participant. It's hard because, at times there's so many things that are going on all at once, as there is in all of our lives, that it's hard sometimes to want to focus inward on yourself, and focus inward on your current situation. Mm-hmm. But it makes it so much easier when those conversations can happen, when you can have, and it's probably the most important conversation that you will have in the lifetime of your relationship with your partner or spouse. And absolutely, if you ask any wife or partner who says that, her husband started to open up, her partner started to open up, it takes a lot of burden off them as well. And we have to be very considerate of that. Let's face it, despite, women are affected by infertility in a completely different way, because there is the mother bond is like nothing else in this world. And we have to respect that. This isn't, for guys, this isn't all about us. This is about our family. This is about the family that we are married into. This is about our spouse who we love to all ends of the earth. This is about making a comfort and building a true strength, and not just being there and sitting in silence in a support group meeting, or just putting a hand on while you're in a virtual session. It's about being hands-on. Absolutely.
Do you remember that moment when you and your wife started to become, more public, more when you had those honest thoughts that you expressed to her, Jon?
It was, I can't remember specific ones, but I can just remember at times just having better conversations, mm-hmm. and having more dialogue. Sometimes it was just sitting in bed and examining the different possibilities, especially as we started to get towards the decision of going to Victoria. Because we were debating, do we do Calgary? Do we do Fargo, which has a great program as well? Mm-hmm. And ultimately we chose Victoria, and it was the best decision we ever made for obvious reasons. But to be out in Victoria, in almost a paradise-like situation, and being able to have that rest and relaxation, and certainly it made it easier when we were both able to talk about it. I was nervous, I was nerve-wracked, there's no question about that, but it's something that I know that we had to have, that we had to talk about it, and in the right environment we were able to, and we came to that decision and figured out the logistics of packing up as much of our house as we could, and packing up our anxious dog, and packing up everything else, and driving across Canada over Thanksgiving weekend and driving back over Remembrance Day weekend in 2014, right as a snowstorm hits the border on the way back. But it all starts with conversation. And I think there's so many guys that miss out because be it ego, that we feel too proud to be able to talk, be it whatever it is. And I've certainly felt like that I had trouble, even in the basics of admitting that I was having mental health issues and I needed to, start looking at the antidepressants. I had immense trouble doing that. But for me, once I did it, it felt a lot better. And it honestly does feel better. Once you have those conversations, everything starts to run a lot more smoothly all around.
I'm going to be grateful for a long time, Jon, for having this conversation with you. And I know I'm responsible. I'm the reason why we started late, and I'm going to be the reason why we go a little late here. But I just thought I'd offer you an opportunity before Jon, the other Jon with an H, comes back to just sort of close things out and talk about where we can get the book and a few housekeeping details. If you just had some final thoughts that you'd like, if there's one thing that people take away from you today, and more importantly from the book, what do you hope it is?
It's something that sounds innocuous, but it's so important. There's a reason why I made the tone that I did. People questioned, how can you be funny and how can you have humor when you're talking about infertility, something that's serious? I even had one of the people that I interviewed. I asked her straight up about it. She's a therapist in the UK. And she said that she knows patients that would say that it's offensive to think that you can laugh about infertility or you can chuckle about it. In this case, laughter, well, it's not the best medicine because obviously the best medicine is IVF or other drugs that are hopefully going to come down the line one way or another at some point. It helps immeasurably to be able to laugh at the situation, to have a bit of a humor to it, to be able to have those conversations and to be able to just laugh at things. One of the most shocking thing in a way was that I found a Reddit forum where people were talking about how much they were able to laugh at 16 and pregnant and those kind of shows. And, but that's the reality, is that you have to be able to have a sense of humor about it. I referenced Karen Jeffries before. She is the queen, the unquestioned queen. And Karen, I know that I'm gonna get a remark about it from you, but it's the reality is that you have to be able to have some humor towards it. Your humor is going to change from TGIF to Comedy Central roasts, but you have to be able to giggle, to have those private laughing moments or to have those public laughing moments, because it does help immeasurably to have those sentiments coming out. And I built the book that way for a reason. I intended it to be funny. One person on Goodreads said it wasn't funny, so be it. They have a much different sense of humor than I do, apparently. But honestly, the reality is that you have to be able to laugh. You have to be able to remember what it is to laugh. It's hard. It's incredibly hard to find laughter sometimes amid these tragic moments, amidst all these traumas. But it helps so much. And if you can get a couple chuckles out of the book, if you can laugh at me and my experience in the testing room, if you can laugh at the inclusions of Seinfeld and all those kind of things, I'm happy you can. I'm glad I could infotain you. No other way to put it.
Well, you didn't just entertain me. As I said, I really learned a lot. And I think the best gift of this book is how it can be a gift to so many people, Jon. It's not just about, it's about your journey for sure. And I think it'll be a great help to men. One of our listeners tuning in, just looking for that advice of how to start talking about it. But I think it's also, if we know of anybody who's going through this, we all have to do better, myself included. It was a real eye opener for me of the things I know I can do better on with the people in my life who are going through it. Odds are it'll happen again, that I know somebody in my family or friends that'll go through it. And I think that your openness it really is a gift to all of us. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the laughs, because those were important. You made me cry. You got me a little bit angry at times. And so I think that is the way this is supposed to go. So thank you for the time and for being here and for your tremendous book. I hope everyone gets it. And if you haven't, you give it and read it. And Jon Taves, I'll pass it back over to you because you have a few things just to add about where to get it for those who are looking for it. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Oh, no, thank you, Lauren. And yes, as mentioned, the book is Swimming Aimlessly, One Man's Journey Through Infertility and What We Can All Learn from It. Published by Tiller Press, distributed by Simon & Schuster. We have copies at McNally Robinson Booksellers, and you can come in and get them. You can call us up. You can order them online, and we deliver locally, nationally, internationally. Wherever you are, we'll get a copy of this book to you. And I think tonight has given you a really good preview of the humor, thoughtfulness, and generosity of spirit that Jon Waldman brings to this book. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here this evening. I'd like to thank Lauren for coming on board as such a wonderful host and for hosting such a thoughtful conversation as well. And to you, Jon, for being so incredibly open both in this book and tonight. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege. And thank you both.
You deserve applause, Jon. Too bad it's virtual, but I'm giving it.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Good night, y'all.
Good night, everybody.